Hueco Mundo is such a barren world filled with absolute nothingness amid the bleak eternity that existence has no significance for the beings living there. They only experience life as a cycle of striving after inborn desires they can never fully satiate, followed by death. The struggle for existence and the notion that only the strongest prevails shows that the only thing to live for was to fight to the top. However, the despair of nihilism begins to take hold when one realizes the meaninglessness of existence for their species. If a greater force, one who even gave them a greater reason for living, order, and the capacity to act on reason as opposed to instinct was unable to do so, then nothing will be able to fill the void of meaning that the Hollows as a species represent. Too late to achieve salvation, they are eternally damned. Instead of contemplating the unpleasant realities of life, this particular Hollow would use the power bestowed upon him to accept their judgment, live without morality as what a damned soul should, and would do so until the moment came when he takes his last breath, creating and fulfilling that meaning for himself. But because he is a living soul, he still has a fundamental urge to continue living on until the day he experiences that moment of liberation from life and finds salvation through a death where he may fight his end in a manner more dignified and embrace it. His hollow hole, which is surrounded by the fragments of his hollow mask and concealed by an eye patch, is the gaping hole where one of his eyes should be. His rank, which is tattooed on his tongue, is something he frequently displays to show off how strong he is. Proclaiming himself as the strongest Espada, he is the Quinta Espada, Nnoitra Gilga. He understands that the nature of their species and the conditions in which they live predetermines that they would all meet the same end, regardless of their morality, or lack thereof, or even evolutionary progress. Seeing no point in opposing what they should be, Nnoitra tramples on others in an abhorrent, dishonorable manner, doing everything in his power to make them feel small and irrelevant. The most heinous example is when he personally restrains their female captive, rendering her helpless as she watches her only hope being crushed while he firmly establishes himself in a position of dominance. This is due to his insatiable nature. He'll reduce nearly everyone who stands in his way, even allies, the wounded, and children. In fact, he would use any means necessary to ensure his victory, resorting to cheap shots, hostage-taking, and sneaking up on people while they're too exhausted to fight. These triumphs would be seen as legitimate victories and proof of his power. Although Nnoitra has a terrible personality and doesn't treat his one and only Fracción well, there is proof that he's capable of caring for someone other than himself, as evidenced by the fact that he accepts Tesla's company, which he previously didn't. Nnoitra would only become extremely defensive and lash out whenever Tesla attempted to help him without being directed to do so. This is due to his irrational suspicion that Tesla's actions are similar to those that resulted from his relationship with someone who did, in fact, pity him in the past.
Everybody always feels so much pity for me. They realize they're only rubbing salt in my wounds. Whether they're strong, or whether they're weak, whether they're only a child, or some monstrous beast, I will kill them with one blow, so that they'll never have the strength to pity me again.
Nnoitra Gilga had a long history with a former Espada of a higher rank, Nelliel, when he held the rank of 8th Espada. Despite the fact that they never agreed on anything, couldn't understand each other, and weren't really fond of one another, she felt drawn to him. Nnoitra continuously challenged Nell to duels, who he had yet to defeat, and Nell couldn't figure out what he was trying to accomplish through the gratuitous violence in battles. In his own words, he couldn't stand the thought of a woman being in a position of authority over him, let alone being more powerful. This was his way of trying to convince himself of and rationalize his hatred for Nell, because he struggled to accept the fact that she was the source of his problems, which he insisted was due to gender. While he doesn't respect women, the issue is much deeper than that. As far as we can tell, Nnoitra is simply using this kind of irrational thinking as a convenient excuse to pursue her. After all, his problem with Nell was entirely personal. But because it would further injure his pride, he refuses to acknowledge that the real problem is his relationship with Nelliel and how she perceives him. Nelliel never treated Nnoitra with respect, and all she ever did around him was talk down to him. This higher-ranking Espada, in his eyes, has such low regard for him that she feels obliged to look after him, even going so far as to spare and save his life, as if he's incapable of looking after himself. Her repeated devaluation only adds to his inferiority complex and his overall sense of inadequacy. Nnoitra used other hollows he could kill as a way of lashing out, delivering them the merciless death she would never let him have. It was his only way of dealing with self-pity, as death was preferable to knowing you were defeated and spared, which was also a subdued expression of her generosity on his part, given that he finds pity to be so degrading. Eventually, he was able to release himself from the burden of judgment by removing the person who was constantly passing judgment on him and meddling in his personal affairs. She stood in the way of him finding solace from his misery. The most obvious indication that something had changed in him was Nell's absence. With the root of his problem gone, he no longer had to live vicariously through the weaker opponents he slayed. Instead, he could make them feel worthless by sparing them and making them live knowing they were defeated by him. Another piece of evidence is that Haribel, a female Espada who was ranked above him, does not appear to be a target of his ill will. In fact, aside from that one brief occasion, the two never interact. So there was no need to confront her because, unlike the previous third, she minds her own business. As much as he despised Nelliel, he recognized her enough to be the warrior to put an end to his life. And if there was a real issue with her gender, he wouldn't have insisted on asking her to kill him after each of their battles. In truth, despite his victory over her, Nnoitra still wanted to overtake her with his actual strength and defeat her in battle. He left Nelliel alive in an attempt to undermine her dignity, just as Nell had done to him. But, seeing as she must spend the rest of her days in Hueco Mundo as a helpless toddler, Nnoitra believed that to be worse than death.
You'd probably tell me I'm acting like some mindless primal beast again. As if I care. The whole point of battle is to win at all costs. It doesn't require a good reason. Fighting isn't logical. Never has been. You looked for some lofty rationale and paid the price. You make me sick.
While she remained static, the Espada as a whole became significantly more powerful. He had ascended the ladder by the time she reappeared and was able to withstand her signature move without getting hurt. Having the toughest hierro among the Espada made him the Espada with the highest degree of physical impenetrability. The gap between him and her had closed. He is the strongest, and this is his display of treachery.
Pray! Santa Teresa!
The Quinta Espada's Resurrección. His multi-armed scythes are meant to evoke an image of the sacred grieving mantis. Each has a weapon for quick strikes and defense, totaling 6 arms with high-speed regeneration capabilities, with one set hidden to launch surprise attacks, furthering his dishonorable way of fighting. Anything that will give him the upper hand. Being the best melee fighter in the group demonstrates how much time and effort he puts into getting stronger. The 5th Espada is not delusional, and he is well aware of the fact that he is not the strongest. Having the toughest hierro is a reflection of his decision to hold on to his false sense of superiority, as it permits him to assert that there is no prospect of hurting him and sending everyone around him into despair. This gives him a fleeting sense of superiority, masking his feelings of inadequacy. As a result, he develops a hatred for those who persist in trying despite the odds against them, as he too seeks to prove his own self-worth in order to overcome his own despair. In other words, his aspect of death.
I am the strongest. The strongest! The strongest!
With Nnoitra's incitement of despair, all hope was momentarily lost in his favor, but that was before the appearance of another savage beast. The only thing that gives these two treacherous brutes a true sense of life is fighting. They enjoy it more than anyone else in their respective organizations. However, their reasoning and conviction about what they want out of a battle will result in a point of divergence between the two barbarians. To begin, they both let their opponent land the opening blow and even encourage them, but for very different reasons. Nnoitra takes great pleasure in their despair at being powerless to harm him, while Kenpachi considers whether they are a worthy foe. The former, who calls himself the strongest of his kind, is preoccupied with demonstrating his superiority to others. He only cares about winning, regardless of the means by which he achieves it. The concealed hollow hold represents the void within him, as well as his true nature, which is to die in battle. The latter has been given the title of the strongest, feared for his ferocity and strength, yet unconcerned by his reputation. Instead, all he wants is a good battle and the chance to tear his opponent apart. The problem is that he wins fights so frequently that he has to hold back most of the time in order to fully enjoy them. The fact that he hides his strength serves as a handicap to make fights last longer, because only a good fight can make him feel alive. Toward the end of the battle, we see Nnoitra becoming increasingly frustrated and desperate, succumbing to his despair over his inability to defeat his opponent. And as much as Zaraki enjoys the bloodshed between him and a strong foe in a long and difficult battle, he doesn't want to die, even if it means ending a fight against a worthy opponent in which he was able to go all out without any restraint. Similar to Nelliel, Kenpachi finds it distasteful to finish off injured opponents, but Nnoitra takes it as a direct insult to his dignity because in his mind, that means neither would regard him as an equal, but as someone to pity. In contrast to how Nelliel handled him, leaving him on his knees and refraining from killing him despite everything he had done to her, her friends, and her subordinates, Kenpachi treated him like the equal he desired and gave him what he had been denied for so long. All the 5th Espada wanted was to receive the death he desired through battle, and he eventually got the end he'd long sought. Just before he dies, he looks the person in the eyes who to some extent is the object of both his insecurity and his need to be acknowledged as a warrior.
Nnoitra?
Alrighty, how do you feel about Nnoitra Gilga? Give me your thoughts, opinions, and criticism of his character in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think of him.